we're not isolated, and all the big geniuses, all that we think of, the peak creative minds, they were not on their own, not at all. They they interacted, they learned from all their precursors, and they built upon this knowledge. And this is the point that these tools do so well. But that's only one thing. That's only one part of creativity. All that personal style, all that personal experience, all that values that you learn, this comes into play as well. And so I think in the end, yeah, I can admit that these tools are creative in this sense of they can produce images that I would have to, spend hours and hours of learning to draw or whatever. But that's one part of creativity, and we can now focus on maybe the other part.
Pushing the boundaries between design, art, and digital technology, Martin Grödl and Moritz Resl founded Process Studio, an experimental design studio based in Vienna that specializes in generative and interactive design for branding, web, installation, and print, as well as traditional graphic design solutions. Process designs and develops highly specialized software that is used as tools for and by clients who include MIT, Design Museum Holon, MAC Museum of Applied Arts Vienna, the Royal Museum of Fine Arts of Belgium, and many more. In 2021, Process designed the official Austrian contribution to the London Design Biennale. In 2022, Martin and Moritz were appointed as guest professors in visual communication at the Salzburg University of Applied Sciences. Their work has been featured in design publications like Dezeen, Weave Magazine, the Type Directors Club Annual, Gizmodo, and the New York Times, among others. Martin is a designer, programmer, and artist. He participated multiple times in Google's Summer of Code, working on further development of the processing programming language, and was a guest artist and researcher for Motion Bank in Frankfurt. He's taught courses on programming, generative graphic design for printmaking, data science, and more at the Vienna University of Technology. Moritz is a creative director and designer. Previous to co-founding Process, Moritz worked for Sagmeister and Walsh in New York City, where he designed for clients like Adobe and the Jewish Museum in Manhattan. I met Martin and Moritz through Latte Christo Fritsch, who's a member of the Austrian Chamber of Commerce Bold community. I've thoroughly enjoyed every provocative conversation I've had with them, and I'm excited to share this one with you. Are machines creative? Will artificial intelligence replace creatives? We dive into these questions on today's episode, along with exploring the role of design, critical thinking, and data curation in helping envision the future in which we want to live. Listen to learn more about the custom-built AI tools that Martin and Moritz designed for their AI emojis and AI fonts projects, and how the grungy punk aesthetic of their emojis reflect our emotions. Martin and Moritz also discuss how we're not separate from AI as the creators of the tools, and how crucial it is that we understand how they work and the values that are fueling and driving them. Enjoy.
Have you ever thought, what if this is all just a dream?
Welcome to Creativity Squared. Discover how creatives are collaborating with artificial intelligence in your inbox, on YouTube, and on your preferred podcast platform. Hi, I'm Helen Todd, your host, and I'm so excited to have you join the weekly conversations I'm having with amazing pioneers in the space. The intention of these conversations is to ignite our collective imagination at the intersection of AI and creativity to envision a world where artists thrive. Martin and Moritz, welcome to Creativity Squared. It's so good to have you on the show.
Hi, there, nice to be here.
This is two guests. This is the first time we have two guests in one interview, which I'm super excited about. And Martin and Moritz are based in Vienna, and Latte put us in touch. So she gets credit for two different interview guests for today's show. And I met Latte through the Austria Chamber of Commerce's amazing, bold unconference, and was so excited to meet Martin and Moritz because they've done some really interesting things with AI and creativity, which we'll dive into. But for those who are meeting you for the first time, can you introduce yourself and your studio and kind of share your origin story with us?
Sure. So we actually work together as a two-people studio, and we're called Process Studio. And I guess our origin story is kind of we have a similar background in that we both studied computer science and later on media art. And we met at the end of the computer science study, and both went on to study art as well. And after that, after the diploma in media art, we kind of were in this in between world of generative art, using computers for art and for design, and we thought about where we could work, and we actually didn't have any real option. So we just said, okay, let's try it ourselves, and found a company, and that's when we started with Process, and now that's 8 years ago. So as a really small team, two people, freelancers from time to time, but we haven't really grown since, except for connections with other people. And well, in terms what we do is mainly like graphic design, and nowadays it's called generative design or creative coding. So we do a lot of design projects and use our own tools, use programming, use data, use all those tools not traditionally associated maybe with arts and design. I mean, it's such a big world and such a big field, and everybody uses the computer, of course, but maybe not on that level that we might do.
Yeah, it seems weird at first glance, but actually it totally made sense to us. At least we combined this rather technical background or technical approach that we learned at the technical university with all statistics and mathematics and programming, which can be a very very how do you say bumpy ride to get into. But we immediately knew that we also wanted to do something creative, which programming sometimes is not regarded as being creative, at least not in a sense that is commonly acknowledged. But we were also quite interested in doing little experiments, and as Martin already said, doing these small little tools for individual projects. And that actually happened quite naturally, to combine, building our own tools for the projects that we did, because we basically wanted to do something in the beginning. And then we found out, hey, there is no tool that does exactly this or that. And so we were kind of left alone with the idea of we just had to make our own tools in order to realize what we have thought of in the first place for the projects. So this combination nowadays is I think not so uncommon anymore, and we also can see also at universities, design universities, we are teaching their workshops and so on, and generative design is sneaking its way slowly but steadily into the design curricula as well. And a lot of designers, come in contact with programming on a very approachable level as well. So it totally makes sense as a designer to not only be limited to the tools that are given to you by big companies, but also as a small team, you can basically build your own tools and fool around and experiment and do the stuff that does exactly what you want it to do, and not being left with, only the capabilities of the software that you can buy.
I love that. And I have a feeling with all that's happened in generative AI this year, that the schools will be adopting it a whole lot faster than pre 2023. But you all actually got into AI building some of your tools before the Gen AI blew up with the onset of ChatGPT. So can you tell us about your first project and how you kind of built your own tool for your AI application?
So I will just say a small sentence for how it led up to us working with AI, and through that approach, using creative coding and coding in general for design projects, we got more and more involved with I'd say like museums and clients, clients like this, as opposed to commercial clients, advertising agencies and so on, because they have these more complex topics. I would say they have whole exhibitions and so on, and they were kind of they like this approach that we can incorporate data maybe and interactivity and stuff like that. So in 2019, the Museum for Applied Arts Vienna, called the MAC, approached us to do a key visual and visual identity for their exhibition on artificial intelligence. So maybe Moritz can explain how we came up with our idea.
And the subtitle for this exhibition was Artificial Intelligence and You. So it was this kind of dialogue setup that happened. And Marlies Wirth and Paul Feigelfeld, the guest curator, they basically brought us in, and they told us the first draft, the first concept of the exhibition, and they left us with the idea, maybe you can come up with some key visual or some visual idea that is also generated by an AI. And we're talking 2018, so this was way before the big Gen AI hype really took off. And the most famous, or one of the most famous things was This Person Doesn't Exist at that time, a project done by NVIDIA. And they were using, they were basically creating faces instantly that looked quite realistically, looked like real human beings, but they were all generated. And you could see it because they had these uncanny teeth, there were some imperfections with the ears and the eyes and the where they were cross-eyed sometimes. But in general, at a first glance, they all looked very realistically. And then we had a look into the tech that was used back then, the GPUs, and they had, of course, extremely expensive hardware that was needed to develop and train something like this. And we had only our laptops basically at that time, so we needed to find a way of using less data but having a similar result in the end, method from a method perspective, right? And we came up with the idea of using AI emojis, not AI emojis, sorry, emojis. So these little low-res faces, and we used them as a training set. So we had a scraper that would scrape, all the emojis from web pages, and then we built our data set coming from this. And then we basically had our tool create new emojis. It was mixing these statistical patterns that it learned to create new visual output. And that was basically weird. Can I curse on this podcast? I don't know. Weird faces. Yeah. Is it allowed? Or not?
We can. We'll mark it as explicit, but yes, okay, you can.
I don't have to. Yeah. It's a way of emphasizing the thing. But it were very weird faces that came out. So basically, Uncanny, which was the title of the exhibition, was super fitting to that visual output. And when we did the project, this was, I think, our third visual line, so our third idea that we were pitching to the team. And we said, if you guys don't want to use it, we have to do something with it, because we were so interested, and it was so uncanny and felt so weird and new to us that we just had to do something with it. And the team to our surprise, really loved it as well. And it was actually a no-brainer. And then we went from there, and we really celebrated this low-res approach as well. So we had huge banners all over the city with posters and banners and really big imagery, but using only this super small resolution of, I don't know, 64 by 64 pixels that were forming the faces, and we blew them up enormously. And then we also, created the whole graphic part for the exhibition. So all the labels, all the explanation texts that would go onto the walls and so on. And we also needed a typeface for that as well. And then we basically had our system set up and thought, okay, maybe we can do something similar with typefaces. And then we used images containing type to generate new typefaces, basically. And then we had, again, this weird shift of styles and weights of typefaces that resulted in, basically an endless stream of new typefaces. So it was this endless visual stream, and each frame would be its own typeface, basically. And so years after this, I think it's now 4 years that we have done this project, we finally came to finalize it in some way and put it up as a real typeface that people can get. And it's called the AI font. And yeah, people can have a look at it. And you can really, you're not buying only one typeface, but it's basically a process of generated typefaces.
Yeah, and I'll be sure to, I know like for the people who are listening, that it's hard to visualize the emojis that they did, the uncanny values emojis. So I'll be sure to include links to their AI fonts and embed images and whatnot into the dedicated blog post that accompanies this interview. But I actually have interviewed Marlies Worth, who's the curator that worked with Martin and Moritz on this project. So you'll actually get to hear her interview after this, where we talked about it. But I was trying to like figure out how to describe the emojis. They're kind of like have in my interview with her, they kind of have this like, I don't know, grunge, smeared like look to them. I don't know how you would describe them, but they it seems more like punk emoji-esque type of feel to them.
Yeah, totally. I mean, they are really, I don't know, messed up. I would say they are really, broken, and it's really, I would say this is like kindergarten AI. This is not refined. This is really low res, rough, grungy on old laptops. But we actually like that, right? We like that approach, that what comes out if you remove all the polish and all the guidance and all the filtering. So what is really the core, so to say? And yeah, it's dirty, it's messy, it's grungy, but we liked it, and that's our kind of style. We like this kind of rough things, but not everybody does. But to our surprise, nearly everybody picks out one or two of them and really likes them and builds a connection. And it's, I don't know, it's because these are faces, right? And we know these faces and these emoji, we have an immediate emotional connection, and that's why I like this project. Now in retrospect, it was not really big concept behind, so to say. It was just trying to do something with AI tools as a really small team. But in retrospect, I really think this symbolizes our relationship to technology in a very interesting way, because we are not separate from technology. We are the ones who produce these AIs, and we make it happy and confused and angry and greedy and whatever. So this is a good reflection. All these emotions, these AI emojis throw at us, is a reflection of ourselves, and I really like that, and I like that people can connect. And sometimes I think it's like, they are. At first we tried to categorize them in like happy, sad, neutral, but then we had to make this other category that was just like horror and like out of any category, that really, really messed up. But I think it's like people, like people like this dog with a missing leg. It's kind of still, it's cute, So yeah, that was a nice starting point, getting into AI.
Yeah, and basically they are very hard to decipher because they don't really fit into the emotions that we are used to, especially when we are using emojis for communication. And that's another aspect why it was quite fitting, because it was about this dialogue, and emojis are used for expressing basically feelings through text using these little images. And with this AI, there emerged this kind of dialogue that was very hard for us to decipher, because there were these emotions, as you can call them, that were not easy to read because they were, as Martin already said, really weird. And it was not, okay, this one is sad, this one is happy, this one is disgusted, this one is, I don't know, looks like this or that. They were all kinds of different things combined into one emoji. And that's what also makes them very interesting to me as well on a personal level, because they are not what they look like at a first glance, maybe.
They're definitely provocative. And I feel like the added layers of not being able to quite understand what emotion they're trying to convey is probably more human or reflective of human emotions than the emojis in our phones that have like assigned emotions kind of to them.
Yeah.
So in that regard, you guys might be ahead of the emojis in our phones.
Well, I don't know about that, but yeah.
We use them differently. They're actually, if you look at the Unicode standard, they are not assigned a meaning. They are just descriptive. It's just it doesn't say but, it says image of a peach, right? It doesn't say what you have to assign. And as you know, the peach is not used for peach. We assign them these meanings ourselves, which is quite interesting if you look at emoji. And also, I've noticed that people use the same emoji differently, right? I have some emoji that I use with my girlfriend, for example, that has a specific meaning, but nobody else uses it that way. So that's quite interesting.
And I just think all the different types are forms of expression that we have. Like we're just trying to express ourselves, and we have text to emojis to GIFs. I probably spend as much time looking at GIFs as I do emojis of like, how do I want to complement this text of what I'm trying to send to video? And now we're getting, generative. I mean, what was it just last week? Facebook announced their text to image creation tool, which I think will be almost like text to GIF type of thing, with their video on demand, more or less, generative AI video. So it's just really interesting in how expression, we get all these different tools that we're trying to figure out how to express what we feel and whatnot. So I find it all very interesting too. So, how many of these emojis did you all end up creating, and how many ended up in the exhibit?
I think we created 10,000 still images, and they were also,
wow.
We printed them out and made little buttons that we would hand out at the opening of the exhibition. And then we had a few still images that we picked for the posters and for the banners, for the advertising material. And then we also had small little AI pods. That's what we called them. These are Raspberry Pis, attached to a projector. And there was running a little AI model as well in real time. So when people went to the exhibition, they would actually see new AI emojis being created on the spot as well. And that's actually, infinite number of AI emojis. So this doesn't end. So there is no end to the stream. So in that sense, there is no number to that. But I think really using them for a specific image, we only ended up using 10 maybe or so.
Wow, 10 out of 10,000. That's a lot to curate and boil down to. Well, and then you mentioned, Moritz, as you were describing the project, you also kind of mentioned your AI fonts as like your second foray into building the tools and working with AI. So, what got you, I guess, specifically into font? Did that inspiration come somewhere else? Like, how did you decide to dive into fonts?
Well, as a graphic designer, typefaces come up at one point, and especially when you're designing the visual identity for an exhibition. Of course, type is a vehicle for transporting information, basically. But the AI font really happened quite naturally because we had this system already set up for creating these new AI emojis, and then we were basically just curious, hey, what happens if we are doing typefaces instead of faces? On a technical side, it's basically the same. So we are only using images, and the system doesn't really care if the image depicts I don't know, a tree or a face or a font or anything, basically. So it's the same system, and we just wanted to try it out as well. And as I said already before, the result was also this endless stream of different styles, oscillating from one style to another. So we had, upright to italic to really bold fonts to super thin fonts to script fonts to monospace. So everything in between. And it was at that point quite new visually as well. So everybody was kind of I don't know, disgusted or impressed or found it interesting. We liked it. If I can only say that, but it was at least something new, and it was weird, and that's why it was very fitting as well to the concept of the exhibition.
Oh, and I know with like when DALL-E and all the Gen AI tools came out this past year, like fonts are actually really hard for these tools, and I think the later models are able to produce them better. But that's kind of one of the signs that it's AI generated, is that the words don't actually come out as like words. It's just kind of like garbled letters and stuff. So how did you all back in 2018, 2019 actually get I guess high fidelity fonts where you could tell that they were at least fonts or letters? Because I know that that's one of the challenges with some of these tools right now too.
Well, we basically tricked the system, or like, if you have a generative AI system like Midjourney or DALL-E or something, they're not specifically focused on fonts, right? Fonts is just something that happens to be in a lot of images, in a lot of photos, and it doesn't really recognize them. It doesn't know this is an A or a B or something, right? These images are not annotated that way. So and we just hijacked the system by using. I mean, it's quite an obvious hack. Just using a sheet of ABCs, right? Like a sprite sheet where the A is always in the top left corner, and the B is next to it, and so on. So we just put in a lot of glyphs in the end of all different kinds that we found, that we scraped from the web again, right? And what it ends up doing is having a lot of a big data set of different A's and different B's and C's and all the letters and all the punctuation and so on. And that way it can spit out new fonts and new sprite sheets at the first stage. So it was a kind of a manual process, because then you have just your ABCs. But if you want to have a specific text, you had to pick out all the right letters for your text and stitch them together. So this is a second step that we did first kind of with a script. And then you end up not with a font, but with images of your word or your sentence. And we got a lot of requests from students and people that said, hey, how can I use this AI font? And it was really cumbersome because they had to send us their text, and we generated an animation for them or images, and we send it back. So it's quite, a lot of people are turned off. It's too hard to send somebody something and get it back. And so we decided just this year to kind of make a real font out of that, and through another, technical hack, to kind of vectorize all of these sprite sheets of different fonts and clean it up a bit as necessary and throw it into a variable font in the end. And through that process, we ended up with a usable, font that anybody could download and install and use in all your normal design programs and text processing programs. But it's not really the AI system. It's limited to a few of those. It's not generated on the fly. It's all pre-generated. But it's the next best thing to try it out, and it's much more convenient. And it's kind of a little product that you can get and try and so on.
Normal traditional typefaces, maybe the family consists of, I don't know, 50 fonts if it's a lot, or maybe 70 if it's really big. And here we have 500, and they basically span from the beginning of the training, where it's only noise, and we let it in there as well. So the first font, if you want to call it that, is just noise. It's not legible in any sense. And then it gets progressively better. And then you can skip through the training steps, basically. And we named them 1, 2, 3 until 500. And they get better, or at least they get better in a sense that you can read them better. But they are still, it's basically a typographic experiment. This is not a finished typeface, and it shouldn't be, actually. And it's also not comparable to a normal, all the craft that goes into really creating a typeface. This is a very different approach. We are coming from this experimental, technological, generative point of view, and not so much. We are not so much interested in creating a perfect font. Basically, this wasn't the goal for the whole project.
Yeah, it's still more an AI project than a font project. It again shows this kind of low-level baby AI without supervision, without reinforcement, without selection. It's just reproducing what we put in. In this case, a lot of fonts, a lot of rendered glyphs, and then it tries to reproduce it. Starts from white noise and gradually produces better, in quotation marks, results as it learns to mimic, and it gets better in the sense that it mimics what we define as fonts better. And it's more like more like a communication project about AI as it is trained. So it's a variable font, and you have just one axis, as it's called in variable fonts, and this is the training step. And as you go from 0 to 500, you see how it learns to reproduce and mimic fonts better. And you also see how it drops back into these kind of local minima, what's it called in machine learning, where it finds a really good solution. And then it can, when it's getting overtrained, it can become bad again, right? Because we're not really supervising it as any AI company doing a real product would do. They would try to optimize it. They would try to implement feedback to get a good result, but we're just letting it run wild and thrash about. And that's why it's also grungy and a bit dirty.
I love it. Well, and I'll be sure to link to this project as well, because it's available to the fonts are available to be bought and downloaded if anyone listening or watching wants to play with it too. And I love that you guys build your own tools just to experiment. Now, with all the Gen AI tools that have come out, are you playing with the tools out there like Midjourney or DALL-E? Are you more interested in building your own tech? Tell me where you're at with the state of Gen AI today in your experiments and projects.
I mean, we are playing a little bit, at least I am, but only from a very curious standpoint. It's not about, hey, what's the next big thing or something like this. I'm just interested in what's currently available, basically, from a user's perspective, and but only very, very sparsely. I've just fooled around a little bit with ChatGPT and so on. And also in the early days of DALL-E and Midjourney, we've tried it out as well. But it got quite stale, quite fast or quite quickly. And it really depends on if you have something that you want to use this tool for. If you just want to, fool around and do something with it, I think it's not so much interesting. It's not, at least to me. And it greatly depends on the project. If you have something that you want to do and use the tool for it, go ahead. But it's not that we are, constantly texting each other, hey, have you seen this new tool? and so on. So we're not so much ahead of the curve in that regard.
Yeah, I'd say we follow it as a kind of a high level perspective. These tools do make news all the time now. And I mean, I also don't like to try every version and it takes too much time. But when things make news, and when my dad, who is over 70 years old, asks me about some of those tools that I haven't heard about, then I will look into them, right, and see what it's all about. So, and from that, you see what a big impact those tools have. Like, everybody has heard about it, especially with ChatGPT now, because it's so general purpose, right? Much more than any generative image program. So yeah, we kind of like to follow these trajectories that come out on a bit of a higher level, and I'd say I'm mostly interested in what do these tools, how will they change society and jobs and things like that, which is kind of hard to anticipate, of course, but it's also, it seems obvious that it will have a kind of big impact, right? Or an substantial impact at least. So this is kind of interesting to also look at the circumstances where these tools come out, out of tech companies, but then there are also open source versions. Then there are, also on the dark net, people are misusing the stuff, right? Because of course on ChatGPT, on the big commercial sites, you can't do porn images, or some things are forbidden, and they should be. But of course, what people want is things that are forbidden, and they do want violent stuff and porn stuff, and it's natural. So it's also being done. So this is kind of interesting as well. And yeah, I mean,
I just wanted to throw in something that I read yesterday about an insurance company that had an AI model that would decide whether some people get insurance or get their costs covered or not, and it had a 90% false rate, so it was detecting stuff wrong, but it was actually by design. So it makes sense for an insurance company to decline more cases that actually would need support. And my point is something else. My point is that it already has a big impact onto society right now already. And I think nobody denies that this will only get bigger and more broader as AI is, finding its way into so many more applications than just, Photoshop, for example. So it's not only this, but if I just look at the design scene or the creative scene, stuff like being an illustrator will be incrementally difficult because you can basically train any AI on all individual styles, and you can replace a lot of general use cases with just using an AI or stock photography. That is easily replaceable by an AI. Or also web design. I mean, there are already big companies that are investing a lot of money to create these tools to have automated web design as well. So I think a lot of the general applications will be replaced by an AI quite soon. I think in the next 5 years for sure. But I was talking to my father the other day, and he's a musician, and he's also interested in this new technology things. And he told me about he used ChatGPT for writing lyrics for a song, including all the chords. And he said, yeah, you get a result, but it's quite stale basically. So the result is not really interesting from a musician standpoint. And he told me that it's still impressive if somebody goes up on stage just bringing his or her saxophone, for example, and just being able to play. But then everybody else, of course, is also able to write a song by just prompting some text into an AI generator, and then you get a result as well. So I think music is also quite a good example for this, because when this auto tune was introduced, I don't know, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I can't remember. It was a big deal back then, because everybody said, okay, nobody needs to sing anymore, because you can change and alter the voice afterwards, after it has been recorded. So even if somebody's singing a wrong note or something, you can change it. And maybe AI is doing something similar, because you can generate an image. But maybe if an image is really crafted by hand, it might still be different, or it might still be more appealing to people. It's quite hard for me to put the finger on at the moment, but that's what's my hope, that ideas, or being really invested as a human being as well, might still be valid also in 10 years ago. And then again, as Martin already said, it's not machines that are building these machines or algorithms. It's people who are designing and maintaining and developing the tools as well. So it's hard to make a differentiation here as well.
Well, I know, new technology opens up new job titles and careers as well. I mean, before graphic design, I guess digital graphic design, it was all hand, but now with Photoshop, when you think graphic design, at least in my mind, it goes almost all to digital in a lot of ways. Photography needs cameras, videography needs the video equipment, at least before Gen AI. But I have a question, because I know I've had other guests on the show who identify as AI artists. Do you all identify as AI artists or AI graphic designers, or are you designers that experiment with AI? I'm curious, since we talked about identity and expression earlier in the show, where you lean on that right now.
I don't really identify as an AI artist. I would just, if I think from the stuff that we are doing, we are basically designers. We get hired to fulfill a specific need and to, create something specific for a client, usually. So in that sense, we are very much designers by craft. And I just think we are interested in these new technological developments, and we try to incorporate them into our workflow if it makes sense, but not in a way that we just take what is out there, but mostly we take a step back and really try to analyze what it is that this technology makes special. And then we most of the times try to recreate it ourselves and make it somewhat our own. Because we are not so much interested in creating this most, high fidelity, super high res imagery. We are basically very much interested in this low res, general graphical shapes, very bold and simple in some sense. So we are kind of in this safe spot as well, that we are not, always running after this new visual improvement, because the basic concept behind it stays the same. And that's also just coming out of our interest.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I know before we started recording, I think, Martin, it was you who mentioned that you get a lot of like students in university coming and asking advice about, what they should do if they're, designers are studying design, what they should do about creative jobs. So I'm curious, what's the feedback that you're giving students right now related to that?
Yeah, that's true. Like, especially when we put out the AI font, a lot of design students like requested us to do an interview, and they wanted to do some bachelor thesis or master thesis about AI and design and so on. And of course, the question comes up: how is my future job affected by this? Am I being replaced? And it's quite, of course, I mean, I ask that myself too, right? If AI is doing my job in the future, what should you do, right? So, I mean, the answer is, my first answer was a few months ago. I said, okay, either you embrace it fully, try to learn these tools, get ahead of the curve, be good at writing prompts, right? I think it's going to be a job, right? To write good prompts for producing images, for producing anything, even websites, all the stuff that will be coming with generative AI. So you need prompt engineers. You might need data curators even further down the line, right? If you think about when we can tailor these systems even more to our needs, we might have an influence to the data that is being used. It's still further out because the training is kind of expensive, but still there will be a lot of jobs. Now, going back to design, yeah, if you become good at writing prompts, you will have a career ahead of you. Or on the other hand, if you don't like, chasing this path, and maybe, it's kind of unclear, which tools will come out on top and so on, and maybe you learn the wrong one and so on. Another option would be to kind of take a step back and think of your role as a designer more as a directorial role, right? As a curation role, as defining a concept, and not so much about producing a specific image or a specific text and so on. Because that is still something that I think is not being covered so much by AI. Of course, in some cases, you can do anything by AI. For example, I saw a few weeks ago, there's all these tutorials now out there, how to make a quick buck by, in this case, it was okay, do a children's book and sell it on Amazon. And you can basically generate the story. You use like a free story, a fairy tale story, Little Red Riding Hood. You put it to ChatGPT, it writes it in a different style or whatever. You have your story, and then you generate all the images by Midjourney, and then you still have to layout it, but maybe that will be quite easy as well. If you prompt some tool, lay out these images and these texts, you get a PDF and you can sell it on Amazon by print on demand. So this kind of mass produced, really low effort products will be done as well. But as soon as you're talking interesting design challenges, I think it's so important to have a curatorial role, somebody who talks to a client and understands them and kind of translates what they want and what they need to some design product, right? To some images and some brand design, key visuals, whatever. So you can go in that direction as well, I think. And it's up to you. And I think what I also, just one more sentence, what I also saw, that the young people are not afraid so much, right? And it's just when you're a certain age, you're kind of ingrained in your way of doing things, and then you're afraid of new stuff. And then I came across this quote it's from Douglas Adams, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And in one of those books, he comes up with these 3 rules how we react to technologies, to new developments in technologies. And he says, well, up to the age of 15, like anything is normal for you. It's just natural part of the world. So if a new AI comes out, it's just like it is. It's nothing special. And between 15 and 25 of age, it's kind of exciting, it's revolutionary, and you can probably get good at it and get a career. And then over about 35, every new invention is kind of against the natural order of things, and it's you're opposed to it. And so there is a lot of hope for young people. They can cope with this stuff much better than we can do, probably.
Yeah, it kind of seems, I like that framework. Although since we're on the latter end of that spectrum, I'd like to say that we're since you guys experiment and I'm diving into all things AI, that maybe we're younger at heart when it comes to technology. But it does seem like there's kind of this commodification of content, and what you were saying about the AI for books. I think just because it's Gen AI doesn't mean that it's going to be good by any means. So you really do need that the creative eye and to determine what's good or what's not good for sure.
No, it's like it's good to kind of dive into how these systems work, and I think kind of it seems like most people know already that these systems reproduce patterns that they find in data, and they get fed like huge amounts of data. It's like for ChatGPT, it's about like what 10,000 people can read in their lifetimes. ChatGPT has knowledge of and has read. And based on that huge amount of data, it kind of can produce texts that look good and look and sound good. But that's a very simple explanation. Of course, it's being refined, but it's just a statistical pattern generation. So it has been described as a kind of statistical parrot. So it's a machine that parrots stuff, but it's very sophisticated. It's really a high-tech, sophisticated parrot, right? And that's enough for a lot of things. Yeah, that's enough for doing a lot of jobs and a lot of good, probably results, right? But it's not the same kind of creativity, I think, that humans kind of exhibit.
It makes absolutely sense to not really take the things for granted that you have, and especially in a world that is shifting towards more digital instead of less digital. It makes actually really makes sense to get some sense of understanding how things work in a technological sense, and not only, if you have a basic understanding about how an app works, about how, since we're talking about AI, about image generation works, it makes sense to maybe on one hand, identify it as being generated by an AI, maybe, but also it always helps you to question things, basically, and this is something that cannot be taught by an AI. And if, in worst case, if everything is generated by an AI, you still have your own judgmental. You always have your own system of judging things, or maybe not judging is the wrong word, but having a critical look at things and question them. And this is also something that would be, I guess, is more and more important also in schools and universities, to really teach people to dive deeper into the stuff and not only take it for granted, and always have a look behind the facade and how it's produced, and also to get an understanding about how it might have been altered as well. And also, if we think about fake news and so on, and deep fakes, and everything else that might possibly be harmful for society and the whole planet, as well. So I think this critical thinking and gaining an understanding about how these things are crafted and generated will play a much bigger role in the future as well.
Yeah, and to a point earlier about the forbidden things that these AI tools don't allow right now. Well, there's some out there that do, and I know Elon Musk just recently announced his XAI tool, and I'm not sure if it's just text or text to image or video, but yeah, we'll get really interesting with some of these with the guardrails. And I think one of the things that I've said before is on the show, and I think Martin, you might have said it too, that these tools are just mirrors of who we are and the society and whatnot, and that we've all kind of got to decide together what that means. But I know also when we were talking before we started recording, one of the questions that came up was like, can machines be creative? And I know you all have been in the space for a long time, so I'd love to hear your thoughts and have you expand on that for our listeners and viewers.
Yeah, before let's say ChatGPT, so even after doing our own like generative emojis and fonts and so on, when I was asked this question, I always said, no, these machines are not creative, not at all. It's always we build a system, we as humans or as society or as a company or whatever, we build a system that produces stuff. So in the end, it's us who are the creatives, right? It's a mechanical, deterministic tool. But with ChatGPT mainly, the question has shifted for me a bit, because it's so far-reaching. It's so general purpose. The way that it's using, that it exhibits certain characteristics, and it has to be seen how it can fulfill all of these roles, but then it's being combined also with images and so on. So there, I would say now we reflect differently on the role of creativity, because it seems to be there is a certain part of human creativity, at least that I feel we have valued as creative, that is being replaced, or as at least being done as well as we can do it by machines. And that is all that reproductive, like reproducing things, learning by reproducing. And I think this is a big part of creativity. This is how we learn. This is how we grow up. We're not isolated. And all the big geniuses, all that we think of, the peak creative minds, they were not on their own, not at all. They, they interacted, they learned from all their, precursors, and they built upon this knowledge. And this is the point that these tools do so well. But that's only one thing. That's only one part of creativity. All that personal style, all that personal experience, all that values that you learn, this comes into play as well. And so I think in the end, yeah, I can admit that these tools are creative in this sense of they can produce images that I would have to, spend hours and hours of learning to draw or whatever. But that's that. That's one part of creativity, and we can now focus on maybe the other part.
It's an interesting question of how do you define creativity. One guest asked me, and different guests across the show have had different definitions of what it means to be creative. But I think one thing that's kind of interesting, and one reason why I love the show is like we assign creativity to be such an inherently human trait, and now that these machines can pair millions and trillions of ideas together. But I think one of the interesting things is, what's novel and new when these tools are more generative, and like what Martin said is like a parrot. Like how do you define like a good idea or a good design that we haven't seen before? And I'm not sure that these tools and their generative nature will be able to arrive at that. But I'm curious what your response or thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I stumbled upon a few papers recently that dealt with this topic of creativity, and it's quite interesting how they try to study this. And one of them did use. I mean, there is, like in psychology, there are measures, there are tests for creativity. Something is called the Torrance test, something like that, and they kind of quantify creativity in a way, and AI is acing them, totally acing them, like 99% success rate. So they're doing better than 99% than people. And then, I mean, this is, then you get into, okay, are these tests valid or not? And then they are dealing with, they have different qualities. They check for, are these are you fluent? Can you elaborate? Are you flexible? Can you produce multiple ideas? Can you elaborate? Stuff like that. And all these are aced by, as you know, when you talk to ChatGPT, for example, it doesn't stop, right? It can produce variants endlessly. So these might not be the best tests. So they tried in a different paper another approach, which was try to come up with ideas. And they did one with business ideas, and then they evaluated those, by experts, so to say, people who invest in new businesses. So it's kind of a more realistic measure. And also in these, they did quite well. The generative AIs do quite well. And what I really liked in this paper, they didn't pit human ideas against AI, but they specifically said human on the one side and human plus AI, because it still was a person using the AI tool to come up with ideas. So this was quite interesting, and it seems like there could be a path to creating maybe also new ideas and solving problems. But it's always, I think, a collaboration, right? And an evaluation, and nobody can really decide, is this idea novel or good or what, I mean, you can vote, maybe you can do a popular vote, you can put it out there and see, there is no objective measure, but it could be a tool working with AI. And just the last point, of course, being these kind of high-tech, sophisticated parrots, you could say on a kind of philosophical level, they could never come up with new ideas because they are replicating their inputs. But on a more practical sense, I think these papers, they do show that a lot of ideas depend a lot on combination and on recombining existing ideas and make them viable and so on. So there is some value to be had for sure. But I think always in collaboration, right? I think there is no sense in automating AIs on a level, and nobody's thinking about that, right? I mean, it doesn't really make sense right now.
Yeah, I often, on the collaboration point, there's a quote by Michelangelo that I often think about. And this is just kind of the gist of it of, I saw the angel in the marble and set it free. And like, if you think about the marble as like the generative AI model and everything that it's been trained on, scraped, what's online on the internet. It's like, if you just have the idea and the prompt, that you can really get whatever out of it that you want in that regard. But you have to know what you want and the question to set it free. But it's still kind of limited to what's available online, and there's still so much that isn't online as well. But I love that quote by Michelangelo when thinking about AI sometimes.
Yeah, I think that has been brought up by Aristotle as well before Michelangelo. That was that substance and form, right? You have this substance, the marble, but somebody has to bring the idea and the form to carve it out. So the substance has all of the ideas inside, and then you kind of curate it. And it's kind of interesting. It doesn't talk about technical skills at all. So, yeah.
Well, I feel like we could keep talking for hours and hours. I wish we were in a coffee shop in Vienna sharing this conversation over coffee. But I want to make sure to let you guys plug any projects or your website that you want our listeners and viewers to know. And again, I'll be sure to link everything into the dedicated blog post.
If people are interested, they can, follow us on Instagram, of course. We'd appreciate it. And they can also have a look at our website, because there is our studio is running for almost 8 years now. So we've done quite a few projects already. And we are always happy about people reaching out to us. So if you want to have a look, just go over to process.studio and have a look around.
And one question I like to ask all of my guests is, if you want our listeners and viewers to remember one thing from this conversation or from the work that you do, what's the one thing that you want them to walk away with?
Let's do one each, right? So I'd say, especially with technology, keep in mind that technology doesn't happen on its own. It's us as a whole, as society, who builds technology, and especially designers. Not only designers of the technology, but also, like, we are, visual designers and product designers. I feel this is kind of very similar to technological designers. We also build stuff that is being used or at least consumed by people. We have, I think, a big responsibility to think about the implications of our work, because we do influence people and we do build things that are being used by people. So we kind of always have to think, what kind of future do we want? And what is my work, my API, my tool, my website, or my project? What kind of future is it promoting?
Well, and my sentence would be to have a critical look behind the scenes and put the result, have a look at the system in which it was created, and the values that are fueling and driving the system, because there are big implications that, if you change the system, everything else coming out of this system changes as well. And especially thinking about the future of media in general and media consumption and the internet and connected world and so on, it's really more and more important to have a really maybe a slower look at things, and question stuff basically, and not only take everything for granted and everything that you see is real. I mean, this is of course also a very old idea. If you think about the invention of photography, this has always been there, but I think it gets more important as we go as humanity, and because things are altered, and things are altered in specific ways in order to achieve something. And this is something that we need to be aware of as well, especially as somebody who designs these things as well.
That's so well stated, both of you. And I couldn't agree more about the intentionality going behind the tools and the designs, and for the ones are creating, and then the ones on the consuming side to get curious about every layer in the process. So what a wonderful note to end the show on. So it's been an absolute pleasure. It's been an absolute pleasure having you both on the show. So thank you so much for sharing all of your thoughts and your amazing design work. And I can't wait to see what else you all produce out of Process Studio.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us. Yeah.
But have you ever thought, what if this is all just a dream?
Thank you for spending some time with us today. We're just getting started and would love your support. Subscribe to Creativity Squared on your preferred podcast platform and leave a review. It really helps. And I'd love to hear your feedback. What topics are you thinking about and want to dive into more? I invite you to visit creativitysquared.com to let me know. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for our free weekly newsletter so you can easily stay on top of all the latest news at the intersection of AI and creativity. Because it's so important to support artists, 10% of all revenue Creativity Squared generates will go to ArtsWave, a nationally recognized nonprofit that supports over 100 arts organizations. Become a premium newsletter subscriber or leave a tip on the website to support this project and ArtsWave. And premium newsletter subscribers will receive NFTs of episode cover art and more extras to say thank you for helping bring my dream to life. And a big thank you to everyone who's offered their time, energy, and encouragement and support so far. I really appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. This show is produced and made possible by the team at Play Audio Agency. Until next week, keep creating.